Hi guys, welcome back to the Adaptive Zone podcast. My name is Matthew Boyd. I'm a physiotherapist and running coach. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you're so inclined, share it with a friend. Today we are talking with Tyler Eng, again, who's a physiotherapist, actually a physical therapist because he's in the US, and a running coach. So we have a lot in common. And we're going to talk about exercise dosage because he put out some interesting content about this recently. I wanted to bring him on to kind of expand on that a little bit. So, Tyler, thank you for joining us again.
No problem, Matt. I appreciate you having me on again. I guess I wasn't too bad on the last episode or two. So, yeah, happy to be back and talk more about running.
Loads of positive feedback about both your episodes. So, yeah, it's definitely always a pleasure. And just for the listeners who haven't caught either of those episodes, could you just tell us a little bit about you, your professional work, your background, that kind of thing?
Yeah, sure. So, like you mentioned, I'm a physical therapist and run coach based in the United States, Southern California, San Diego. Great running city if you ever get a chance to go. But I primarily work with runners through my company called MoveSpace Physical Therapy and Performance. We help runners, overcome their injuries, get back to running, crushing PRs, and ideally running for life. That's the big focus. We want people to run better and healthier forever. That's the dream.
So really taking that long-term view of everything you do with your runners.
Absolutely, which is oftentimes a very slow cook approach that maybe isn't as flashy as some things on, social media, but it gets the job done.
Cool. So like I said, I saw some content that you put out about exercise dosage. And could you just explain what you mean by that and how it might relate to like running injuries?
Sure. So I think looking at exercise from a perspective of dosage kind of helps put some things in perspective when we're looking at training and injuries. So I forgot where I heard this from, but I think it might have been when I was in physical therapy school. Someone talked about how exercise is kind of like medicine, right? They actually described during class, like, hey, if you had a pill you could take that could, improve your cardiovascular health, could make you stronger, could help you live longer, could prevent certain diseases from happening, would you take that pill? And everyone's like, yeah, of course we'd take that pill. Well, guess what? That pill is exercise. So that was the first time I thought, oh, okay, exercise in a way is kind of like medicine. And like medicine, we want to prescribe a certain dosage of medicine to make sure it's providing a healthy therapeutic effect. So, sometimes when you're taking a medicine, let's say maybe antibiotics, you have an infection and, your medical doctor's like, take these antibiotics at, this amount of antibiotics. And you want to make sure you follow those instructions because if you take too much, there could be side effects, right? Or if you take too little, it won't be effective. The infection will persist. So you want to take the right amount. And exercise is really similar. And I think it's a good way to describe, how we want to use exercise. Because a lot of times, let's say running, for example, you might hear from some people that running is bad for you, that it's bad for your knees, bad for your joints, whatever. That myth is very persistent in the world right now. But, those are probably instances like people who have like knee issues with running. That might be an instance where the dosage of running for that person may have been too high. And that is why someone had an experience where running may have caused some problems, some injuries, some aches and pains. And we know from the research too, that there is sometimes a sweet spot with running, and doing too much could be maybe a little detrimental, but doing too little could be equally detrimental. And might be a sweet spot where if we do just enough running, that we get all these amazing therapeutic effects. And I think that helps maybe people understand like why certain exercises are good for you, or I'd say all exercises are good for you, but just in the right dosage.
Mm. So in that sense, like if you had a medication, if you took too much, that would actually cause you harm. So rather than benefiting you, and that's kind of the similar way you might look at it with exercise as well as with running. It's not so much that black or white running is either bad for your knees or good for your knees. It's like, what was the dose of running? And I guess that also refers to like at what time. Like for for how long, and because I'd imagine the exercise dose that I could handle of running right now is different from what it was, before I took up running when I was a new runner, right? Like, so the dosage might be like, depending on the time at which it's taken.
Absolutely. I think it's important to know that dosage changes across time or with different circumstances, right? So like, yeah, maybe let's say a runner's used to running 30 miles per week. They do that for a while, but maybe they had a month off completely for whatever reason. They try to go back to 30 miles per week, but that dosage might now be too high for them because they lost some conditioning. They're not used to running that mileage anymore. So maybe they need a lower dosage. Maybe it's 15 miles that first week back, and then they can gradually build that back up to 30. So that dosage can be a moving target depending on the context of your situation.
So the dosage of running is something you would prescribe specifically for runners depending on where they're at in their journey in terms of their injury recovery as well as their like fitness and overall health. You would prescribe the dosage based on where they're at.
Exactly. And that's, that can be a tough thing to do sometimes. I mean, I think that's why people like you and I have jobs, because we're able to gauge, what the right dosage might be. And sometimes that can take some trial and error too. I think that's important to note, that we don't have a perfect way to figure out like what the exact dosage is at any given time. We have to kind of try things out and see what the response is. Do you feel good with it? Do you get the outcomes we're looking for? Are you more sore or achy or getting injured from the current dosage? Those pieces of information help inform us how to modify the dosage to find that sweet spot.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And it's the same like if you had a chronic condition, you would start with a dosage of a certain medication, say it was diabetes, and then you look at the metrics and how they feel, and then you would adjust the titration like up or down depending on the response of the body, because it's a complicated organism. It's not always easy to predict exactly what the right dosage. You get a ballpark and then you fine tune.
Exactly. Yeah, we're constantly reassessing. Like it's like getting lab work done regularly. We're kind of doing the same thing, but from a exercise and fitness perspective.
And then as well with your running, I'd imagine that the intensity, like how fast you're running and whether you're running on trails, whether you're doing hill repeats, or you're doing like long runs or really easy runs or run walks, that's going to affect the overall dosage of the running, because it's changing. I don't know what it's changing about it, but it would be different if you got someone to do hill sprints 5 days a week as opposed to do easy runs 5 days a week. Like, that's a different dosage.
Definitely. I think we're talking about intensity now, right? So that's another variable in the dosage framework we're talking about. We're like, we have volume. That's one thing, just how much mileage we're doing in a given time frame. But what's the intensity of it? Is it their speed work? Is there hills? Are we on trail? Are we on road, on treadmill? That's another factor we have to play around with, and that's another reason why this gets harder to find the right dosage, because there's many variables at play.
Yeah. And I guess, would you also consider exercise dosage when you're looking at like rehabilitation exercises? So if you're getting a runner with, say, Achilles pain, you would probably give them exercises to help rehabilitate that Achilles pain, and then you would be looking at the dosage of those exercises as well. So not just the running, but also the kind of rehabby, strengthy exercises.
Yeah, absolutely. So dosage would definitely be applied to any form of exercise, not just running and not just performance. It's also in the rehab world. And I think it might be even more important in the rehab world, because I think sometimes maybe the margin of error might be a little smaller because we're dealing with pain, or maybe injured tissue. So we have to be a little more conservative with our dosage recommendations. So I often, when I'm working with someone with a new injury or I'm working with a new client, I definitely prefer to be on the safe side and underdose exercise to start, because there's less harm with underdosing than overdosing. Overdosing causes problems. That's when pain goes up, we get more hurt, people are upset. No one likes to be in more pain or more injured. But if we underdose things, we can build confidence, we can gain some momentum with movement and training, and then we can slowly increase the dosage, dial up the intensity, the volume of whether it's running, if it's strength training, plyometrics, whatever it is. That's going to help us find the sweet spot of dosage more safely than if we shoot too high. Going backtracking is a lot harder than moving forward from a low dose.
It's interesting, just as you were talking, it reminded me of, like, as part of our process, what we do with a new runner who's injured is we have a 1 to 2 period of calibration. And I guess what we're trying to do there is figure out the dose. Like, I didn't think of it in those words, but it was like, I need to get the, like you say, I would try something more conservative, see how it feels, and then use that to adjust the dose up or down for the first period that we're going to work, which is usually like the next 4 weeks, and then on from there. But like, we have this period of calibration, I guess. Yeah, that's what we're trying to figure out, is the exercise dose, both in terms of running and in terms of rehab exercises. What's too much, what's not enough, how do we get the right dose? Do you sort of find a similar thing with your athletes when you're working with them? You have to kind of find the right amount, and then you kind of know how to progress. But at first, you kind of need to watch them a little closer, kind of thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the first 2 weeks, or first whatever X amount of time you spend with someone, there's a lot of unknowns, right? Especially if it's someone you've never worked with. You have no idea how they're going to respond to exercise, to running, to strength training, plyometrics, or also the combination of all those things. So maybe if someone who does a lot of running, but maybe they've never done plyometrics before, that's a new variable we got to test and see kind of what happens. But yeah, I think that is the appropriate way. I think most rehab experts should go about working with people who are coming up with an injury, and same with run coaches too. When they're working with a new runner, we don't want to throw them into the deep end with high intensity interval training or fartleks right away. We probably want to start with just some low volume, low intensity, see how they handle easy stuff first before we give them the hard stuff.
I wonder, like, not to put you on the spot too much, but if
no, go ahead, do it.
Could you give us an example of maybe someone you've used the dosage of, like, running and exercise and manipulated that you've used with someone recently? Obviously, you don't have to share their name or whatever, but just to give us an example of how this works in practice.
Yeah, sure. Let me think. Let's see. Do you want me to give an example of someone coming off an injury, or more of a...
Yeah, probably, because most of the people who listen to this are broken in some way.
Okay. Yeah, then that'll be probably more helpful. So let's say I've worked with someone who, we'll go with the Achilles problem, because I think a lot of people deal with Achilles or lower leg issues. Had a runner come to me with an Achilles issue. We were about only 3 months away from a marathon, and they were doing their own training already. We had met up, and we had to figure out a game plan to get them back into full marathon training in time to make it to their race, because they weren't able to meet the mileage that they needed to in their current training program. So what we needed to do was, in your words, recalibrate, because the training program they had a generic training program they found somewhere online. That training program was not dosed appropriately for their current fitness level. And because of that, their Achilles suffered. Their Achilles couldn't handle the high dosage of running that this program prescribed. So what we needed to do was recalibrate the program so it could fit his current fitness level. But also we needed to rehab this Achilles to make sure it doesn't continue to flare up. So what we had to do was we had to drop the running dosage pretty significantly from what the plan prescribed. Trying to remember what the numbers were. They were probably hitting this much 3 months out. They were new first-time marathoners, so they were hitting like mid-20s of mileage, 25 miles a week. Let's just go with that. We had to drop them to 10 because they could run, but they just couldn't handle a lot of running. So we dropped it to 10 miles per week. And then we also started to introduce some strength training and plyometric training, focusing on the calves in particular, and a little bit of stuff higher up the chain and knees and hips and stuff. But we also wanted to make sure we chose strength and plyometric exercises that were tough enough that they could do them, but without exacerbating too much pain. And that first week, I did not give them a lot of exercises. I probably gave them like 5 total, which is probably the high end for me when I'm first starting with someone in a rehab cycle, because I'm trying to be very minimalistic. I'm not trying to give too much, because the more exercises I give, the more variables I have to juggle. And if they have a flare up, I don't know if which exercise or exercises cause it. So I'm keeping things as simple as I can. So for that person, we started with some like really easy 2-legged stuff. A lot of little two-legged hopping, 2-legged calf raises, stuff like that. And 2-legged is how I reduce the dose for his Achilles tendon, because in running, we're doing a lot of 1-legged stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But for this person, they couldn't handle a lot of 1-legged exercises. Some like leg calf raises were tough. Single leg hopping was pretty tough, but they could handle 2-legged stuff. So which is lower on the intensity scale. So like a lower dose exercise. So we gave them a lot of 2-legged stuff for the first 2 weeks, and we kept them on a run program of about 10 miles per week with some walk intervals too, to give the Achilles some rest during those miles. Since they couldn't really sustain more than 3 to 4 at once, they had to take some breaks. Mm-hmm. So we dramatically reduced the intensity of their program. But as the weeks went on and the symptoms got a little bit better, we were able to up the intensity a little more, adding a little bit more running volume, more miles each week, converting from 2-legged movements to single leg movements. We did that slowly week to week. And by the time we got to 2 months in, we were already into the high 20s of miles per week, which was the highest they had ever done even before the injury, which was really good. And this was I think it took about 8 weeks to get there, which is I'd say that's a relatively fast response. Not everyone can respond that way. And that's another thing to note too. Everyone has a different response to exercise dosaging too. So just because this person had a really good outcome in 8 weeks, somebody else might have needed more time to get to that point. And then thankfully, by the time we got to 3 months, they were able to run the race, and they did great. They still had some maybe a little calf irritation, because we were still working pretty hard throughout the rehab process, because we had to get them ready for a race. But they got through it without the Achilles flaring up, and they were able to recover within a week or so post-race, and did pretty well after that. Yeah, kind of rambled on a bit with that, but that's basically that's just one example of how that process of redosing the exercise can help you get back to maybe where you want to be as far as running.
Yeah, it was interesting. Like, I noticed one thing you did is you dialed back, like it was almost like you had levers, like you dialed back the running lever and the dosage of exercise on the running, but then you increased it, like you added like strength and plyometrics and bouncing and things. So you kind of redistributed things a little bit and changed the dose by changing the quality of the exercise, as in like what they're doing, and then started to dial them both back up. So the running dose slowly went up, the strength and plyometric dose slowly went up. So you sort of got them back in what I call the adaptive zone, right? And then you started progressing them by increasing the dose and getting their body to adapt to the ever increasing dose. But in a way, it was titrated at a dose that they could respond to, because the cookie cutter plan had, like you said, overdosed them. It had given them a dosage of running that they couldn't adapt to, that they couldn't do without flaring up. So you redistributed the loads and the dosage, and then moved it up. And that was quite interesting.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, I think the lever analogy is a great way to put it too, because there's so many different levers you can pull from, and we just want to pull kind of the right combination of things without going too aggressive with our training, our rehab programming, which I think can sometimes be easy to do, especially when we're in a time crunch, like for a race. Like that's a variable that makes things a little trickier with dosage, is that sometimes we have to maybe try to push things a little faster than maybe we would like, because we have this deadline. So I always make it clear too when I'm working with the clients, like, hey, we have this deadline, but just know, like, this is going to be there's no guarantee that we're going to be perfect on that day because so much can happen between now and then. But if we take these steps to modify the dosage well, we'll give you your best shot. You're going to have the best shot possible. So I think that's a good frame too for anyone who maybe is getting injured midway in a training cycle, which I know can be tough. You can recover from it in the cycle of training, but the deeper you are in the training, like if you don't, the less time you have between the injury and the race, the harder that's going to be. And sometimes you might want to weigh in of like, okay, is it worth trying to make it to this race in this short amount of time? Or should I maybe defer the race, focus on good rehab, and then do a better training cycle next time to be at your best for the race?
It's always the question, isn't it? Yeah, when you have that time crunch, because I mean, I'm sure the same as me, is that as people get closer to their goal race, their training volume and intensity increases. That's when they're most vulnerable to injury. It's when they get injured. That's when they reach out to someone like us. So there's almost always that time pressure, which does have to be balanced out against recovering from the injury. But something you were saying reminded me, like when I think it was on Instagram, I saw a post where you were talking about exercise dosage. And I don't remember the exact thing you were saying, but I was like, that is exactly right. Because something I've noticed that is really common is that runners will kind of reach out to me and I'll chat with them. And they'll ask me like what they should do, or they'll say what they've been trying to do, and it's lots of different things. So they'll pick up like from some physio a certain exercise, from some influencer another exercise, and somewhere else like some other thing. And it's like they're looking for this perfect exercise key that it's just going to slot in and the pain's going to go away because they have the right exercise now. Whereas when you think about this concept of dose, like it's not, there is the right exercise. Like you can't do shoulder presses. Like you have to do, but yours was like, it was like running and calf raises and some jumping. It wasn't like this very complicated, fancy exercise. It was about the dosage and the progression of the dosage, which is, I mean, it's not going to get you as many views on your reels, right? So it's like, it's not as popular in terms of like content. And I think we've had a shift towards more novelty in exercise because people want to make videos that get more shares, more views and that kind of thing. And like when you talk about dosage, there's just not a very interesting way to display that, even though that for me, like, and listening to you, it seems like a much more important variable.
I think so. Yeah, I think it might be one of the most important variables, honestly, because I think when we see runners too, like the majority of running injuries tend to be related to overuse or under preparation for, running in general. And that comes down to dose. It just comes down to like the dosage of their running, the dosage of their strength exercises or whatever they're doing. And yeah, on social media, it's never talked about. It's the only thing that gets hyped is, novel exercises. Yeah, the real thing, exercise selection, honestly, I don't think that's the hard part. I think that's actually, I think that's the easy part. Like people know it's like, oh, my glutes are weak. Okay, well, yeah, you got a million options that are, right. All of them are fantastic. We have our own biases. We're like, I personally like a certain glute exercise maybe more than some people, but they all work. Mm-hmm. But they only work if they are dosed appropriately. Mm-hmm. And that's the hard part, because you can find these cookie cutter training programs, rehab programs, and honestly, if we look at them, they're probably pretty reasonable. There's probably some stuff in there like, oh yeah, this is fine, this makes sense, but is it going to make sense in the context of each person who like downloads it? Like, because like, is it at the appropriate skill level for them, the appropriate intensity? Does this actually cater to their injury? Or what if somebody has multiple injuries? How does that program now change? Right? You have to make modifications. So I'll give you an example. Actually, this is one I like to use. Is one of the big, most common exercises in the physio PT world are clamshells, which, if anyone listening doesn't know what clamshell is, you've probably never been into a PT clinic because everyone does them.
I was gonna say, is there anybody who does it?
Yeah, but it's the simple exercise, well, simple in quotes, where you put the bands around your knees, you lay on your side, you open up your knees, keeping the feet together, and your glutes should be working. That exercise uh, gets quite a bit of hate, and understandably, because I think a lot of people just don't see benefit from it. They're thinking they do this and like, this is so easy. Oh, you know, my grandparents can do this and they don't exercise at all. It's like, why should I be doing it? And I I take issue with that because I find that the clamshell, when dosed appropriately, can absolutely destroy even the strongest people. Like a clamshell done well is a hard exercise and you can get some strong glutes by doing it. Not to say you have to do clamshells, but this is just an example of like there isn't such thing as really a bad exercise, but I think there's such a thing as a poorly dosed exercise.
Right. Yeah. I think that's a wonderful summary. And I would agree 100%. Because like you said, like I'll often kind of bag on clamshells. But like you said, it's the same reason. It's because I know people have done them and not got results. But the reason they didn't get results was not because there's anything wrong with clamshells. It's because their exercises weren't dosed correctly. And
Yeah.
often, like another thing about the example you gave with the Achilles is like you could have got the dosage, you get the right exercise, right? Calf raises and bouncing various calf stuff, and you get the right dosage, right? Which is just what you did. What if you didn't get the dosage of the running right? What if they were doing twice as much running in terms of what they should have been doing for where their Achilles is at? And now they think, well, calf raises don't work for me. Like that, but it's like because the dosage of the running was wrong as opposed to the dosage of the rehab exercise. So you have multiple dosages that you have to look at.
Yeah. Yeah. You can see why this gets complicated because
Right.
we're juggling a lot of different things. And that's why I think people get frustrated too when they try rehab, or maybe they're working with maybe a physical therapist, maybe isn't familiar with dosing running. I know that can be tough too because they're getting told, okay, you're good to run, but there's no guidance of like how much to run, how often to run. I hear that all the time. People come to me, it's like, oh, I've been cleared to run. It's like, well, what does that mean? Like,
Yeah. How much?
you mean
Like
a run
100
like
miles a week? Like,
yeah, 100
what are we
miles,
talking about
100,
here?
100 meters. Like, that's a big unknown there. So, yeah, I think that's an area of education that I think is really lacking in the running world.
Mm, mm. Well, I think that really lays it out quite nicely. And I think like a really good takeaway there is like there's no such thing as a bad exercise, but there is such a thing as a badly dosed exercise and a incorrect dosing of running. I think that's a really simple and good takeaway for everyone. So that was really helpful, Tyler, because this is not an easy concept to make interesting. Do you know what I mean? Like I was saying, like it's much easier to make, I don't know, backwards walking on a treadmill or, pistol squats on the end of a kettlebell. Like you're going to get more views for that, right? But
I mean, yeah, that's pretty cool. I would
it
watch
is
that
cool.
too.
It is cool. But it's like the dosage of that is what matters. Like you could use that
Yeah.
exercise, but it's like how you dosage that's going to be arguably the most important thing when it comes to getting back from whatever injury you're having. And if if that is not being tightly controlled, then that may be the reason you're not seeing progress. I think is that's what I would take away from this.
I think that's a great takeaway from it. Yeah, just whenever you're struggling, if you're someone struggling with like a rehab situation, it might not be the exercises that are the problem. It could be the dosage. So I think that's maybe if you're working with a physio, that might be a good opportunity to ask maybe your physio or your coach, like, hey, like if this isn't working out, or should we be changing things? I think, yeah, don't be afraid to ask your physio about these things too, because sometimes they just might not be aware. They might think the dosage is working, but if the dosage isn't working, they need to know so they can help you make those decisions and changes.
Cool. And if someone's a little stuck and this is kind of resonating with them, is there an opportunity to work with you potentially to help them with this?
Absolutely. Yeah. My doors are open to all runners who are looking for help. I'm in San Diego and across the world now. Actually, I'm working with some runners across the U.S. and some internationally. So
Cool.
if anyone is interested, they can follow me on Instagram. I'll just drop my handle. That's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
At Tyler Eng, TYLERENG, or at MoveSpace PT. I have a link in my bio to a free consultation call too. It's 45 minutes. If you want to talk to me for that 45 about whatever issues you're dealing with, we can figure out if we're a good fit for each other.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll put links to both of those in the description. And yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts about Dosage. And if any runners are struggling with rehab and wondering if perhaps this is the key, I would certainly recommend reaching out to Tyler, or at least going and following his content and see if more of that resonates with you, because this we're just scratching the surface about the things you talk about, which is, I think you mostly share your thoughts through Instagram. Is that about right?
That's definitely where I put out the most content. I'm on TikTok too, at Tyler Eng as well. But if you really if you want the premium content, that's on Instagram.
Sounds good. But thank you again for joining us, Tyler. This was wonderful, and hopefully I'll be able to twist your arm to come back on the show again soon.
Anytime, Matt. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.